Morning everybody, Simon Dixon here. In news that really didn't get enough attention, more attention deserved definitely, the US Treasury Secretary has actually come out and said that if the US does not increase its debt ceiling very soon, then by September the US government could run out of money and it cannot fulfill its obligations. And yet we don't really hear much about it or many people talking about it. $22 trillion, over $22 trillion of debt, and the US Treasury stating that by September they cannot meet their obligations unless Donald Trump or whoever the powers may be increase the debt ceiling in the US. So, I mean, there's no surprise for anyone that understands, many of the things that I talk about regularly in terms of fractional reserve banking means that there's not enough money to cover all the debt. And therefore, because money is based upon debt and the government have outsourced the money creation supply to the private banking system, then you always have to perpetuate debt in order to have economic growth and meet some of the debt obligations of either the government, individuals, or businesses. But, the fact that we're okay and we just really skirt over news like the US stating that if they don't allow us to borrow more, now that we're 22 trillion in debt, that we could run out of money, and people think that the economy is healthy and that this is good and that stock market should be at all-time highs, and that we're still in a bull run. There's this, I don't know, it just baffles the mind to me. But that's the situation we're in today, that it's okay that the US Treasury is begging for an increase in the debt ceiling so it can meet its obligations and push through 23 trillion, 24 trillion, 25 trillion. To me, this is marking the demise of the beginning of the end for the US dollar, a shift in power, a systemic financial risk event on a scale that we haven't seen before, a global financial crisis driven by some of the systemic risk in the traditional financial system, and many of the things that I talk about in other videos where I talked about how they will use blockchain technology. The central bank, the governments will launch their own blockchain-based cryptocurrency in order to bail out the system, to create a new money supply, a central bank backed money supply, and allow banks to go bust so that without consumers losing their money, as the depositors can replace their deposit at a bank with the newly issued digital currency that will be issued by the central bank, which will be, last financial system was bailed out by quantitative easing, but this one will be bailed out by a central bank created digital currency, and it will compete with whatever happens tomorrow. So there is the Senate banking, maybe I'm not saying these things right, I'm not in the US, but I think it's the Senate Banking Committee meet tomorrow with Facebook to discuss the future of Facebook. Now this one is really shaking up the world. So at the same time as the dollar being backed by the US government, which is has more debt than it can service and is potential to run out of money to service its debt in September, we have the bank lobbyists out in full force trying to make sure that Facebook does not create its cryptocurrency. And the cryptocurrency will compete with the US dollar. And the bill that has allegedly been drafted, no one can really confirm whether it's real or not or what the situation is a proposal to keep big tech companies out of currency issuance through cryptocurrencies, which will have a few effects. I talked about it in depth in yesterday's video, so check out my live stream on Twitter to get more details on that. But tomorrow's the big day when Facebook will be meeting with the Senate Banking Committee, and we'll find out what they're going to do with it. Now, there could be a couple of outcomes. The first one is they could remember that Facebook's cryptocurrency, although it's going to be used on Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, allegedly, it isn't actually being created by Facebook, the US company or the Irish company or whatever tax structure they've set up in their jurisdictions. But it is going to be created by a Swiss foundation, I believe, called Calibra. And therefore, the jurisdiction of the US can stretch as far as it can. But the end result might just be a couple of things. The first thing is that it might just not be available for US people to use. So if the US decides that they don't want something competing with the US dollar, there's nothing, as far as I can tell, with all the legal power of Facebook and their team, to launch the project, Libra, the Facebook's cryptocurrency, but restrict it from US users. And obviously Facebook, being the know your customer king of the world that knows more about anyone than anything than anyone, then they could obviously do a very good job of ensuring that the US users, residents, are not using that. But what that means is that it will end up being KYC hell. People, all these challenges that face today when someone visits America, whether they're able to use it or not. But Facebook might just end up doing what many people are doing in the cryptocurrency innovation space and the financial technology innovation space, which is just leaving out the US. So then the US will have a decision to make. Are we holding on to this power of the dollar when the dollar can't even meet our financial obligations by September if we don't increase the debt ceiling? Or do we give up some of that control and give it to Silicon Valley and our tech companies? And essentially, this is Wall Street versus Silicon Valley. Do we keep Wall Street alive, where the government has outsourced the ability to create money to the private banking sector? Or do we give some of that power to Silicon Valley, where we can control companies like Facebook and have a backdoor to a global currency around the world? So I think after the initial reactions, I believe that this could potentially be the demise of Wall Street, when during the next financial crisis, during the next systemic risk event, the central banks allow Wall Street, large banks, to go bankrupt. They replace it, rather than bailing in and bailing out, they replace it with a digital currency that they issue, meaning that central banks are going to compete with retail banks. And then at the same time, they're going to have to, in order to remain competitive, allow Silicon Valley to get into the business of banking, because the central bank doesn't want to service all the customers and become a retail bank. They're going to allow companies like Facebook and Google that control much of the world's data to actually become global mega banks and issue competing currencies to the dollar, so that they can get control in both ways. And so what we could end up with is Silicon Valley being at the other side of the API keys of the central bank, with the central bank being the issuer of the currency. And in fact, we could move away from a fractional reserve banking system, because Facebook's plans is to back it by a basket of assets. And this could be a movement towards full reserve banking, where the tech companies become full reserve banks and issuers of currency. The central banks actually issue currency direct to the technology companies and fintech companies around the world. And, if the bill happens where large companies are not allowed to issue their own cryptocurrency in the US, then smaller fintech companies are, and larger financial technology companies aren't, which creates an interesting scenario of lots and lots of smaller competing currencies. But at the end of the day, the genie's out of the bottle. A percentage of those people will understand the value of owning your own money, spending your own money, and having financial sovereignty through cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, which is not at the mercy of many of these forces, because no one knows who created it. There is no CEO. There is no office to knock in the door. There's no one to invite to your Senate Banking Committee. It's not running out of money by September. It can't take on debt. And it's moving us towards an exit from the traditional financial system, more economic choice, and I believe in the end, better fiat currencies. So today is definitely one of the most exciting times in financial history. We're seeing unparalleled change on a scale we've never seen before as a result of this little social economic experiment called Bitcoin. So tomorrow's the big day. September, apparently the US run out of money if they don't increase their debt ceiling. And I'll keep giving the commentary as we try and find out what is actually going to be the trigger of the next systemic risk event in the financial system. And I'll try and keep commentary of what types of things you can do to try and prepare for such an eventuality. And please do check out other streams. One of them was a beginner's guide to buying Bitcoin and the things you need to know. Another one was on the financial crisis. I'm going to try and upload these to the Simon Dixon YouTube channel. So if you want to completely stay up to date, then go to YouTube, Google Simon Dixon. I think there's a couple of channels there. There's one that's got approximately 5,000 to 6,000 subscribers at this time, versus the one that's got like only about 30 or something subscribers. I've recently revived the channel. Subscribe there, and then if you hit the bell button every time I go live, it will notify you and send you an email from YouTube as we'll try and give commentary on how this all unfolds. I want more people to be prepared, so please retweet this, please share this, please like it if you enjoy it, and please let me know what other topics you'd like me to cover in future streams and future videos. I'm going to go back to work. Over and out.